He just wanted to look tough in front of his friends and slap a girl in the park. But he had no idea who was standing behind her. Within seconds, everything around him went silent. Her father, Chuck Norris, was right there. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The afternoon sun hung lazily over the city of Austin, pouring down a honey-gold light that turned the lake in the Central Park into a mirror of slow fire. Children chased bubbles near the fountain, couples strolled beneath the oak trees, and somewhere a street musician played a soft blues tune that blended with the laughter of passers-by. Among all this life and movement, a young woman sat alone on a wooden bench, half hidden beneath the broad shade of a tree. Her name was Amy Norris, 19 years old, a college sophomore with thoughtful eyes and a calm face that often made people mistake her for someone older. She wore jeans, a pale jacket, and a white t-shirt. Her phone lay beside her, connected to earphones that whispered quiet music. A paperback novel rested open on her lap, its pages rustling each time the breeze slid through the branches above her. Amy wasn't waiting for anyone special, at least not to strangers watching from afar. But in truth, she was waiting for her father. Chuck Norris had promised to pick her up after classes, and though she knew he was rarely late, today traffic downtown had slowed everything to a crawl. She had grown used to waiting, and in a way she liked this particular bench. It sat just far enough from the playground that she could hear the laughter of children without being surrounded by chaos, and just near enough to the lake that she could smell the cool water when the wind shifted. She turned a page and smiled faintly. It was one of those rare afternoons when the world seemed harmless. Birds hopped between the hedges, people waved politely, and Amy felt at peace. She didn't notice the group of young men drifting from the basketball court toward the path that ran beside her bench. There were 3 of them, Kyle, Rick, and Tommy, each around her age, maybe a bit older, wearing tank tops and sneakers, moving with the restless energy of boys who didn't know what to do with themselves once the game ended. Kyle, tall and lean with a restless grin, walked in front. He was the kind who liked being noticed. Rick, shorter, nervous, followed close, laughing too loud at things that weren't funny. Tommy trailed a few steps behind, his phone raised, recording as if life itself were a show meant for the internet. They had been arguing about who would pay for pizza when Kyle's attention caught on Amy. He nudged Rick with his elbow, nodding toward her. "Look at that," he said, his voice loud enough for her to hear. "Princess in the Park." Rick snickered, glancing at her book. "What's she reading? Fairy tales?" Amy looked up briefly, offering a polite but cool smile before lowering her gaze again. She had learned that eye contact could invite trouble, so she tried to focus on the printed words instead. But Kyle wasn't the kind to leave silence alone. "You out here all by yourself?" he asked, stepping closer. She removed one earbud. "I'm just waiting for someone." "Yeah? Boyfriend?" "My father." Kyle raised his eyebrows theatrically. "Your dad's coming to pick you up? That's cute." His friends laughed. He sat down beside her without asking, his knee almost touching hers. She shifted slightly away, keeping her tone even. "Please, I'd rather you didn't sit here." He looked at her, then at the empty park around. "It's a free bench, sweetheart." Amy sighed softly and closed her book. She had been through this kind of thing before. Boys who thought persistence was charm. Her instinct told her to stay calm, not to react. But Kyle took her silence as invitation. He leaned forward. "You look like one of those college girls who think they're better than everyone else," he said. "I didn't say that." "No, but you think it." He grinned. "You think you own the park." Amy met his eyes briefly. "It's public property. We all share it." Rick burst out laughing, but the sound was hollow. Tommy kept recording, half amused, half uneasy. Kyle's smile faltered. "Oh, she's got jokes now." Amy didn't answer. She put her book into her bag, trying to stand up. But Kyle blocked her path with one leg. "Relax," he said. "We're just talking." "I don't want to talk." "Then don't," he said, and for a second it seemed he might let her go. But when she tried to step past, he grabbed her wrist. It wasn't hard, not yet, just enough to stop her. "Let go," she said firmly. "Or what?" His grin widened, trying to cover the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She pulled once, then again, but his hand tightened. That small act of resistance made something ugly rise in him, a need to prove he was stronger. He pushed her shoulder lightly. A shove meant more to humiliate than hurt. Tommy muttered, "Dude, chill." Kyle ignored him. "Why so serious? Smile for the camera." Amy tried again to step back, but the edge of the bench caught her knee. She stumbled, and in that tiny loss of balance, Kyle's hand moved faster than thought. The sound of the slap cracked through the park, like the snap of a branch. Birds shot up from the trees. A mother near the fountain turned sharply. The boys froze for half a heartbeat, shocked by the sound they themselves had made. Amy's head turned with the blow, her hair falling across her face. Her cheek burned hot, but she didn't cry. Slowly she looked back at him, her eyes cold, steady, silent. Kyle blinked. Something in her calm unsettled him. He forced a laugh. "What, you mad now?" Amy stood, gathering her bag. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You just made a very big mistake." Rick muttered, "Let's go, man." Kyle's smirk returned. "Oh, yeah? And what's Daddy gonna do about it?" That was when they heard the sound, a car door shutting with the kind of precision that made even strangers turn their heads. A black SUV had pulled up along the curb. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple dark jacket and jeans. He moved with the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly where he was and what he was capable of. For a moment, he just stood there, scanning the scene. His gaze went first to Amy, her red cheek, her rigid posture, and then to the three young men. His expression didn't change, but the air seemed to thicken around him. Amy exhaled in relief. "Dad." The name was soft, but it carried. Rick went pale. Tommy lowered his phone. Kyle turned, frowning, trying to place the face that suddenly looked familiar. "Who's that?" Rick whispered. Tommy swallowed. "Bro, that's Chuck Norris." Kyle laughed nervously. "No way." But as the man approached, step by step, the laughter faded. He stopped 2 feet from Kyle. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Which one of you touched my daughter?" No one answered. Rick looked down at his shoes. Tommy shifted backward. Kyle forced himself to meet his eyes. "It was just a joke, man." "A joke," Chuck repeated, his tone unreadable. "Yeah, we didn't mean anything." The man's voice lowered, smooth as steel. "You think hitting a 19-year-old girl is funny?" Kyle tried to shrug, but the movement stuck halfway. Chuck took one more step forward. He didn't raise his fists or his voice, yet everything about him carried weight. The decades of training, the discipline carved into muscle and bone. "Answer me," he said. I didn't mean—" Before the boy could finish, Chuck's hand moved, not fast enough to be flashy, but with an efficiency that froze time. He gripped the front of Kyle's shirt and pulled him close. Not violently, just enough to make him feel how small he was in that shadow. "What's your name?" Chuck asked quietly. Kyle." "Kyle," he said. "Remember this moment for the rest of your life." People around had stopped to watch. Someone began filming. Chuck's voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "You just touched my daughter. That's the worst decision you'll ever make." Kyle's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Do you know what a real man does?" Chuck continued. "He protects women. He doesn't raise a hand to them." Kyle nodded rapidly, stammering, Yes, sir." Chuck released his shirt. The boy stumbled back, gasping. He turned to Amy. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded. "I'm fine." He looked back at the boys. "You're lucky she is." Kyle's voice trembled. "It won't happen again, I swear." Chuck's eyes bored into him. "It better not, because next time—" He leaned closer, voice a whisper that carried more force than any shout. "You won't get a warning." He took Amy's hand and started toward the SUV. The crowd parted silently. Even the air felt different. As the engine hummed to life and the car pulled away, Kyle stood frozen, heart pounding, every nerve remembering that calm, unblinking stare. For a long moment he couldn't move. His friends were already gone. The park returned to its lazy rhythm, the birds, the laughter, the music. But he was stuck there, hearing the echo of that quiet voice. He didn't know it yet, but that afternoon would follow him forever. The video would spread, the shame would burn, and somewhere deep inside him, something small would begin to change. But for now, he stood alone in the golden light of the park, his pride shattered, his chest hollow, and the ghost of Chuck Norris's words circling in his mind like the slow return of thunder after lightning. The video began spreading before the sun even set. Someone in the crowd had filmed the whole thing, Amy's slap, the stillness, and the quiet, terrifying way her father had approached. By nightfall, it had found its way onto social media, shared again and again under headlines like, "Teenager slaps Chuck Norris's daughter instantly regrets it." It was only a few seconds long, but every frame carried weight. There were no punches, no shouting, no chaos. Just the sight of a calm man making the air itself heavy with consequence. But none of that mattered yet to Kyle. At that moment, as the SUV disappeared at the end of the park road, he stood in a silence thicker than the summer air. His palms were slick with sweat, his mouth dry, his heart hammering against his ribs. The crowd had already begun to scatter, whispering and shaking their heads. Rick and Tommy were gone, probably running before anyone asked questions. He was alone now, surrounded by people's disapproving stares, the sound of the fountain trickling like a mockery of peace. He tried to laugh, to say something to himself, some line that would make it feel like it hadn't really happened, but his throat locked. His knees felt weak. For the first time in his life, he'd faced a man who didn't need to raise his voice to make him afraid. That night he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. The stillness in that man's expression, the strength in the calmness. There hadn't been anger, no wild fury, just certainty. It was worse than any beating could have been. By morning, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Texts, tags, messages. He opened one link and saw his own face frozen in a screenshot, the moment Chuck Norris grabbed his shirt. Underneath were thousands of comments, most laughing, some mocking, others furious. Serves him right. That's what you get. How dumb do you have to be to hit Chuck Norris's daughter? His stomach turned. He threw the phone on his bed and sat there for a long time, staring at the floor. He felt like the walls of his room were closing in. Downstairs, he heard his mother on the phone, her voice tense and embarrassed. His father's footsteps soon followed, heavy, deliberate. The door opened, and his father stood there, a tall man with gray at his temples, wearing his work shirt, still smelling faintly of oil from the garage. His face was set in hard lines. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kyle didn't answer. "They called me at work," his father went on. "My co-workers saw the video before I did. They showed me on their phones laughing." He shook his head in disbelief. "My own son, assaulting a girl, Chuck Norris's daughter, for God's sake." Kyle wanted to speak, but words tangled on his tongue. "It was a joke." "Shut up," his father snapped. "A joke? You think that's funny? You've shamed this family. You've shamed yourself." His mother appeared behind him, eyes red. "He's just a boy," she said weakly. "No," his father said coldly. "A boy learns. A coward hides." Then he left, slamming the door behind him. Kyle sat on the bed, staring at his reflection in the dark window. For the first time, he didn't recognize the person looking back. He wasn't the loud kid from the basketball court anymore. He was the punchline of a viral video, the bully who got what he deserved. Days passed, but the noise didn't fade. People pointed at him in the hallways, whispered when he walked by. Rick avoided him, pretending he didn't exist. Tommy had deleted all his social media and vanished. Everywhere Kyle went, there were eyes watching, judging, remembering. The weight of it pressed on him until he could barely breathe. One evening, as rain began to fall over the neighborhood, Kyle wandered through the streets alone. He kept his hood up, hands in pockets, head down. Puddles shimmered under the streetlights, and the air smelled of wet asphalt. He tried to tell himself it would all blow over, that people would find some new scandal tomorrow. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about a video. He stopped near an alley and leaned against a wall, staring at his reflection in a puddle. "It was just a slap," he muttered. "I didn't mean..." "You didn't mean what?" The voice came from behind him, quiet but heavy. He froze. For a second, he thought his imagination had turned cruel, giving him hallucinations of that voice. Slowly, he turned. There, standing at the end of the street beneath a black umbrella, was Chuck Norris. Rain slid down his jacket, shining in the streetlight. He wasn't angry. His expression was the same as before, composed, unreadable. He started walking toward Kyle, each step steady, unhurried. The sound of his boots on the wet pavement echoed like slow thunder. Kyle's heart stuttered. How did you—" Chuck stopped a few feet away. "You think I wouldn't find you?" Kyle swallowed hard. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I already said I was sorry." "You said it because you were scared," Chuck said quietly. "Not because you understood." Kyle took a step back, the wall cold against his shoulders. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to remember what you did," Chuck said. "Not just to my daughter, but to yourself." The rain pattered between them, soaking their clothes. The street around them was empty, the world reduced to two figures under the falling water. "I messed up," Kyle said. "I know I did. I'm just a kid." "No," Chuck said. "A kid learns. A coward hides." Kyle's breath hitched. The words echoed exactly what his father had said days earlier, and somehow they hurt more now. Chuck stepped closer. "You hit my daughter. You thought it made you strong. Tell me, did it make you feel powerful?" Kyle shook his head, eyes wet from rain or something else. "No." "Then why did you do it?" He hesitated. "My friends were watching. I didn't want to look weak." Chuck nodded slowly. "So you hurt someone else to protect your pride." He studied Kyle's face for a long moment. Then, without another word, he closed the umbrella and set it aside. The rain poured over him freely now, but he didn't seem to notice. "You think that's manhood?" he asked quietly. Kyle's voice broke. "No, sir." "Do you know what real strength is?" Kyle looked up. "What?" Chuck's voice dropped even lower, like a prayer. "It's having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to. It's knowing you could destroy and instead you protect." The boy's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I really am." Chuck's expression softened, though only slightly. "Then prove it." Kyle frowned, confused. "How?" "Come with me." "What?" "Now," Chuck said firmly. "You want to be forgiven? Then earn it." For a heartbeat, Kyle hesitated. The rain drummed on the pavement, the sound filling the silence between them. Then, without understanding why, he nodded. 10 minutes later, they were inside a dimly lit dojo on the edge of town. The wooden floors gleamed from years of polish. Rows of calligraphy scrolls hung on the walls, each carrying a word: discipline, respect, control. The air smelled of cedar and sweat. Chuck gestured toward the mat. "Take off your shoes." Kyle obeyed, his socks squelching from the rain. "You ever trained before?" Chuck asked. "No." "Good." He motioned him to the center of the mat. "Every strike you've ever thrown, every insult, every shove came from fear. You've been fighting shadows in your own head. It's time to face them." Kyle frowned, uncertain if it was a lesson or a warning. "I don't understand." Chuck pointed at him. "Attack me." "What? No, I'm not." "Do it." Kyle took a hesitant step forward and threw a clumsy punch, more out of confusion than aggression. In an instant, Chuck's hand moved, light and precise. He redirected the punch, turning it aside with almost invisible effort. Kyle stumbled forward and lost his balance. Before he could fall, Chuck caught him by the shoulder. "You're already defeated before you start," he said quietly. "You don't believe in your own control." Kyle straightened, panting. "You're too fast." Chuck shook his head. "No, you're too angry. You think you're mad at me? You're mad at yourself." The words hit deeper than any strike. "Try again." Kyle attacked again, faster this time. Chuck sidestepped, caught his wrist, and twisted not painfully, but with enough precision to make him freeze. "Every motion has a consequence. Every choice leaves a mark." He released him. Again. For the next hour, the room echoed with the sound of movement and breathing. Kyle attacked, fell, stood, and tried again. Sweat mixed with the rain still dripping from his hair. He stopped thinking about the humiliation, the video, the shame. All that existed was the rhythm of movement and correction, failure and persistence. Finally exhausted, he dropped to his knees. "Why are you doing this?" he gasped. Chuck crouched beside him. "Because no one taught you what a man really is." Kyle looked up, his chest heaving. Chuck's eyes held no contempt, only conviction. You think power comes from dominance? Chuck said softly. It doesn't. Power comes from restraint, from kindness, from knowing you don't have to win to be strong. Kyle swallowed hard. I get it now. Then tell me, Chuck said, who are you going to be when you leave this room? Kyle looked down. His voice was quiet but steady. Someone my father won't be ashamed of. Someone your daughter won't fear. Chuck nodded, then placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Then we're done. Kyle blinked. That's it? That's it, Chuck said. You've already taken the hardest hit. He stood, grabbed his umbrella, and walked toward the door. Don't waste what I just gave you. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving the boy kneeling on the mat, the sound of his own breathing filling the silence. He didn't move for a long time. Then slowly he whispered, Thank you, Mr. Norris. Outside, the rain had eased into a mist. Chuck walked through it without hurry, the city lights reflecting in puddles around his feet. For the first time that night, a faint smile touched his face. The boy had been broken, but not beyond repair. And somewhere inside that silence, a lesson had been planted, one that would grow, painfully but surely, into something stronger than pride. By dawn, the whole world knew. The footage from the park had escaped into the endless bloodstream of the internet, crossing time zones before most people even had breakfast. Within hours, there were news clips, reaction videos, and comment threads filled with awe, mockery, outrage, and fascination. Everyone had an opinion. They slowed down the footage, analyzed every step, every blink, every syllable of Chuck Norris's calm warning. They called it everything from a masterclass in composure to the ultimate father's revenge. It wasn't just viral, it became legend. To those watching, it was another online spectacle, a story to scroll past, discuss, forget. But to 3 people, it wasn't a clip. It was a wound that hadn't healed. For Chuck, it was a reminder of how easily arrogance destroyed young lives. For Amy, it was a lesson in silence and courage. And for Kyle Brooks, it was a mirror he could no longer look away from. He woke that morning to hundreds of notifications. His phone was a weapon now, each vibration a fresh blow. He turned it over on the nightstand, trying to block out the constant buzz, but his curiosity betrayed him. He unlocked the screen and stared at the chaos, dozens of tags, direct messages, comments from strangers. His name wasn't mentioned publicly yet, but anyone from his neighborhood, anyone from school could tell. Someone had already commented, "That's Kyle from Westview High, right?" His chest tightened. He scrolled down further past the memes and jokes. One image showed him mid-fall, eyes wide as Chuck Norris redirected his arm. Another showed his face up close, trembling, while the caption read, "This is the face of instant regret." Some comments called him a punk, a coward, a disgrace. Others joked about how lucky he was to still have all his bones intact. He threw the phone aside, pressing his palms against his eyes. He didn't know which hurt more, the humiliation or the fact that everyone was right. For the first time, he couldn't lie to himself. He had hit her, he had laughed, he had crossed a line that could never be crossed back. The door creaked open. His mother stood there, holding a mug of coffee in both hands, her face pale with exhaustion. "You need to eat something," she said quietly. "I'm not hungry." She hesitated in the doorway. "Your father's not speaking to anyone. He didn't go to work this morning. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Reporters, neighbors." Her voice broke off, the tremor of disbelief returning. "What were you thinking, Kyle?" He wanted to tell her he didn't know, that it all happened too fast, that it wasn't supposed to mean anything, but the words wouldn't come. He stared at the wall, his silence as heavy as the night before. She set the coffee down and walked out. The smell of it lingered, bitter and cold, long after she was gone. At school, whispers followed him like a shadow. Teachers looked at him with the same distant disappointment his parents did. Students recorded him in hallways pretending to text. He caught phrases as he passed. "That's him, the slap kid. Don't mess with him unless you want Chuck Norris showing up." He tried to keep his head down, but shame clung to him like a second skin. By the end of the week, even Rick had stopped replying to his messages. Tommy wouldn't meet his eyes. The three of them had started this together, but the fallout was his alone. Everyone else had vanished, leaving him as the face of their mistake. He stopped going out. He spent days locked in his room, curtains drawn, scrolling endlessly through the same posts, punishing himself with every replay. The still frame of Chuck's expression, so calm, so controlled, became the thing that haunted him most. It wasn't anger that broke him, it was disappointment. That look said everything words couldn't. You could have been better than this. One night he sat in the dark staring at his own reflection in the window. The rain outside distorted his face into strange shapes. He saw not a person, but a blur, something lost, weightless, undefined. "Who are you?" he whispered to the glass. But no answer came. Only the soft patter of rain and the echo of that voice in his memory. The days bled into each other. His father stopped knocking on his door. His mother stopped trying to make him eat. The silence in the house grew thick, and yet in that emptiness, something began to stir, a gnawing awareness that running away wouldn't make it disappear. He could delete every post, block every account, throw his phone into the river, but none of it would change what he'd done. Late one evening, unable to sit still any longer, he opened his laptop and typed a name into the search bar. It was almost a compulsion, something instinctual. Chuck Norris Dojo, Austin. The results popped up instantly. There were photos of the building, testimonials, videos of demonstrations. He watched one for a long time, a clip of Chuck teaching self-defense to veterans. His voice in that video was exactly as it had been in the rain, calm, firm, unshakable. Control is not what you do to others, it's what you do to yourself. Kyle closed the laptop, heart pounding. He stood and paced the room. It was ridiculous, he told himself. He couldn't just walk into that man's dojo after what happened. But the more he tried to shake the thought away, the stronger it pulled at him. Not out of pride, but something deeper need. The next morning, the air was gray and wet again. He left the house without telling anyone, wearing his hoodie pulled low, and took the bus across town. The dojo was smaller than he'd imagined. It sat at the corner of a quiet street, the wooden sign weathered but clean. Through the front window, he could see a few students practicing slow forms on the mat, their movements precise, disciplined, silent. He didn't go in. He stood across the street for nearly 20 minutes, watching, trying to gather the courage. Every time the door opened, his heart jumped. He thought of walking in, bowing, apologizing, saying, "Teach me, please." But fear kept him rooted where he stood. At last he turned and walked away, hands buried in his pockets. The rain began to fall again, thin at first, then steady, until the world blurred around him. He stopped under a street light and looked back. Through the drizzle, the glowing characters of the sign Chuck Norris Dojo shimmered faintly, like a reminder he couldn't escape. He whispered to himself, "Maybe tomorrow." But as he turned to go, a car slowed beside the curb. The window rolled down, and a familiar voice spoke, low and patient. "Tomorrow doesn't teach you anything, Kyle. Today does." He froze. Chuck Norris was behind the wheel, calm as ever. He didn't look surprised to see the boy standing there, drenched and uncertain. For a moment, they just stared at each other through the curtain of rain. Chuck nodded toward the building. "You came this far. Don't waste it." Kyle hesitated, trembling slightly. "You really think I can change?" Chuck's answer was simple. "I think you already started." And just like that, the door to the dojo opened. Warm light spilled onto the wet pavement. Kyle took a breath, stepped off the curb, and walked toward it. The video that had once made him infamous was still burning across the internet that night, shared in every corner of the world. But for the first time, he didn't care. The story everyone else saw was about a man who humiliated a bully. For Kyle Brooks, it was something else entirely. It was the beginning of a lesson he hadn't yet learned, but one that was already changing him. The wooden floor creaked softly under the hum of fluorescent lights. The dojo was empty except for a few faint footprints left behind on the mats from the morning class. Chuck Norris stood near the far wall, his back straight, his hands resting calmly behind him, as if he'd been waiting for something inevitable. The door opened, letting in a gust of damp air and the hesitant sound of footsteps. Kyle stepped inside. He looked thinner, shadows under his eyes, his hoodie soaked from the drizzle outside. His face carried that same uncertainty, but this time it was mixed with something else, a determination he didn't yet know how to name. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain whispered faintly against the roof. Chuck finally turned, his gaze steady, assessing the boy who stood just inside the doorway. "You came back." Kyle nodded slightly. "Yeah." His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Why?" Kyle hesitated. "Because you told me to." Chuck studied him for a long moment before walking toward the mat. "That's not enough of a reason. People do what they're told every day and never change. The question is, why are you really here?" Kyle shifted awkwardly, looking at the polished wood beneath his feet. "I don't know. Maybe because I'm tired of seeing that video. Tired of being that guy." Chuck's tone stayed calm. "That guy was a coward. You're still him, unless you decide otherwise." "I want to decide otherwise," Kyle said, his voice trembling with frustration. "I want to be better." Chuck nodded toward the mat. "Then leave your shoes there and come stand in the center." Kyle obeyed. The floor felt cold under his socks. The dojo smelled faintly of cedar and sweat. A clean, disciplined scent that made him feel both nervous and safe. Chuck stepped across from him, posture relaxed but alert. "You remember what I told you in the rain?" Chuck asked. Kyle nodded. "About strength. That it's not about hurting people." "Good. Now I'll show you what that means when it's not raining and there's no audience." He gestured with one hand. "Attack me." Kyle frowned. "I don't want to fight you. This isn't a fight. It's a conversation. Your body speaks before your mouth does. I want to hear what it says." Kyle hesitated, then stepped forward and threw a quick, clumsy punch. Chuck sidestepped with almost invisible precision, guiding the boy's arm away and placing his palm lightly against Kyle's shoulder, stopping him without pain. "Too fast," Chuck said quietly. "Not in speed, but in thought. You moved before you felt. Try again." Kyle exhaled and tried once more, slower this time. Again, Chuck moved like water, redirecting his motion without aggression. "You see? You're still thinking about winning. Stop trying to win. Just move." They continued for several minutes, Chuck correcting each mistake, not with lectures, but with motion. Every time Kyle lost balance, he caught him, and every time he caught him, he let him go gently. The rhythm between them became almost meditative: step, redirect, fall, rise. Finally, Kyle stopped, panting. "What's the point? You could throw me down 100 times, and it wouldn't change what I did." Chuck regarded him silently, then stepped closer. "You're right. I could. But that's not the point. The point is whether you'll stand up the 101st time, whether you'll face yourself instead of running." "I'm trying," Kyle said quietly. Chuck's voice softened. "You keep saying that, but trying isn't enough. Doing is what matters." He motioned to the wall where a framed phrase hung in bold brushstrokes: "Control over self." That's the only enemy you'll ever need to fight. Every man's greatest opponent lives inside him. Kyle stared at the words for a long time. "I never learned that. My dad just said to hit first so nobody hits you." Chuck's expression barely changed, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "A lot of men were taught that. It's easier than learning patience. But a man who lives by his fists will always be afraid of what happens when he can't use them." The boy's voice cracked. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Start over," Chuck said. "Learn discipline. Learn to listen before you act. Learn to breathe." He took a slow breath through his nose and exhaled through his mouth, the motion deliberate, controlled. When you control your breath, you control your thoughts. When you control your thoughts, you control your actions. And when you control your actions, you control your life. Kyle tried to imitate him, breathing deeply. For the first time in weeks, he felt his heart slow down. The panic, the shame, the noise in his head quieted just a little. Chuck studied him. "You're not beyond saving, Kyle. You just don't know who you are yet." The boy looked up, eyes glistening. "And if I never figure it out, then you'll keep coming here until you do." Kyle blinked. "You mean you'll teach me?" Chuck didn't smile, but there was warmth in his gaze. "No one can teach you who to be, But I can show you how to find it. He turned toward a rack of old belts hanging on the wall. You'll start from nothing. White belt. No rank, no pride. You earn everything, including respect. Kyle nodded slowly. I don't deserve that yet. Then earn it, Chuck said simply. The next hour was unlike anything Kyle had imagined. There were no punches, no flashy moves. Chuck showed him stances, balance, breathing, posture lessons that felt meaningless at first but soon demanded more focus than any fight. Every time Kyle's stance faltered, Chuck corrected him with a tap on the shoulder or a quiet word. Every time he tried to rush, Chuck stopped him and made him start again. When they finally paused, the air in the dojo was thick with the smell of effort. Kyle's shirt clung to his back. His arms trembled, but there was something steady inside him now. Why are you doing this for me? He asked between breaths. You don't owe me anything. Yes. Chuck's eyes softened. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because too many people never get the chance to learn what you're learning right now. Most people stay trapped inside the worst version of themselves forever. You came here, that means something. Kyle lowered his head. I don't know if I can make it right. You can't, Chuck said bluntly. Not what's already done. But you can make the rest of your life mean something better. That's all any of us can do. For a long moment, they stood in silence. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the faint tapping of water dripping from the eaves. The dojo felt still, peaceful, almost sacred. Chuck finally nodded toward the door. That's enough for today. Kyle hesitated. Should I come back? Chuck gave a slight nod. If you want to learn, the door's open. If not, the lesson ends here. The boy looked at him with a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. Thank you, Mr. Norris. Chuck inclined his head. Don't thank me, not yet. Thank yourself when you earn it. Kyle stepped outside. The street was quiet, the puddles reflecting the gray sky. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like the boy from the video. He didn't feel like the villain everyone pointed at. He just felt empty, but in a way that made room for something new. Inside the dojo, Chuck watched from the window until Kyle disappeared down the street. Then he turned back toward the mats, his hands folded behind his back. He knew the boy would return, not out of guilt, but because once a person glimpsed discipline, true discipline, they couldn't unsee it. The next day, when the door creaked open again at dawn, Chuck wasn't surprised. He only said, "You're late." And Kyle, breathing hard from running across town, bowed awkwardly and whispered, "I'm sorry." Chuck nodded once, the ghost of a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Good. Let's start over." And as they took their places on the mat again, the past began to loosen its grip, not erased, not forgotten, but slowly rewritten, one quiet lesson at a time. Weeks passed quietly, marked not by the changing weather, but by the slow transformation that unfolded inside the dojo. The place had become Kyle's second home, though he would never have dared to call it that aloud. Every morning before sunrise, he arrived, sometimes limping from exhaustion, sometimes still half asleep, and stood barefoot on the cold wooden floor, waiting for the sound of Chuck Norris's footsteps. There were no greetings, no small talk, just the calm rhythm of discipline. Chuck would nod toward the mat, and the lesson would begin. Each day felt the same at first: repetition, stillness, balance. They practiced breathing before movement, patience before strength. At times, Kyle thought it was madness. He wanted to move faster, to prove he was improving, to feel like progress was visible. But Chuck stopped him every time he tried to rush. Slow is smooth, he would say. Smooth becomes fast. You don't control the fight until you control yourself. Kyle learned to stand without fidgeting, to move without wasting energy, to breathe evenly even when his muscles trembled. And slowly something began to shift inside him. The anger that used to live under his skin started to lose its grip. He no longer felt that wild rush to prove himself. Instead, there was focus. It wasn't the kind of pride that demanded attention, but a quiet awareness that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than the boy the world had seen online. Chuck rarely spoke about the past. He didn't mention the slap, the video, or the humiliation that had brought Kyle here. It was as if those things no longer existed within the dojo's walls. What mattered was what he did now, in each motion, each breath. But sometimes in the stillness between exercises, Chuck would break the silence with small truths that struck harder than any physical lesson. A fighter's worst enemy isn't the man in front of him, he said one morning. It's the voice inside that tells him he's not enough. You silence that voice with discipline, not fists. One evening, Amy appeared at the doorway of the dojo. She had heard from her father that Kyle had been training, but seeing it was different. She stood quietly near the wall, watching him move through the forms Chuck had taught him. His motions were measured and fluid. Nothing like the cocky boy from the park. There was humility in the way he bowed before and after each practice, gratitude in the way he listened. When he finally noticed her presence, he froze, startled. "Miss Norris," he said softly, unsure whether to speak or bow. Amy smiled faintly. "You can call me Amy." He hesitated. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." Her expression was calm, thoughtful. "I wasn't sure I did, but my father said you've been coming here every day." "I have," he said. "I thought maybe if I kept showing up, one day I'd stop being that person." Amy looked at her father, who was standing at the edge of the mat, arms folded, listening. "Has he changed?" she asked. Chuck answered without looking away from Kyle. "He's learning. Change isn't something you claim. It's something you prove over and over." Amy nodded, her gaze returning to Kyle. "Then keep proving it." When she left, Kyle stood in the silence she left behind, his chest tight with emotion he couldn't name. Chuck walked past him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't train to impress her," he said quietly. "Train to make sure no one else ever has to meet the person you used to be." Kyle swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." From that day forward, something in his training deepened. He stayed longer after each session, sweeping the floor, cleaning the mats, organizing the equipment. The work was simple, repetitive, and grounding. Each small act felt like a step toward forgiveness, not just from others, but from himself. He began helping the younger students too, showing them how to adjust their stances, how to breathe properly. They didn't know his story, or if they did, they didn't mention it. They just saw someone who worked harder than anyone else. One afternoon, as class ended, Chuck motioned him over. Hanging from the wall was a simple white belt, slightly frayed at the edges. "Take it," Chuck said. "You've earned the right to start." Kyle stared at it, confused. "Start?" Chuck's eyes softened. "You think a belt means you've achieved something? It doesn't. It means you've accepted that there's still everything to learn." Kyle tied the belt around his waist with trembling hands. It wasn't pride he felt, but a quiet weight of responsibility. That night, after everyone had left, he sat alone on the mat. The moonlight filtered through the window, reflecting faintly off the polished wood. He thought of the boy who had once sat in the park, laughing as he tormented someone else. He thought of the slap, the shame, the rain, the lesson that had followed. For a long time he just breathed. The silence of the dojo no longer frightened him. It calmed him. He didn't notice Chuck approach until he heard his voice behind him. "You're not finished yet." Kyle turned, startled. "I thought you left." "I did. Then I remembered something." Chuck stepped onto the mat and knelt across from him. "You've been learning techniques, discipline, respect. But there's one thing you haven't learned yet." Kyle frowned. "What's that?" "How to forgive yourself." The boy's throat tightened. "I don't know how." "You will," Chuck said. "But you have to understand something first. Regret doesn't make you weak. It reminds you of who you never want to be again. The past doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it differently." Kyle looked down, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can ever make it right." "You can't," Chuck said plainly, "but you can make yourself right, and that's enough." They sat in silence for a long while. The wind outside rustled softly through the trees. Kyle felt an unexpected peace settle over him. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time, he believed it could be. When he finally stood, he turned to Chuck and bowed deeply. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Chuck returned the bow. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for the boy who comes after you, the one who might need someone to stop him before he makes the same mistake." Kyle nodded. Then I'll make sure I'm that person. Chuck smiled faintly, the first real smile Kyle had ever seen from him. Good. Then the lesson's finally beginning. As the lights dimmed and the door clicked shut behind them, Kyle realized that the dojo had given him something no apology, no viral redemption could ever provide. It had given him the chance to rebuild the person he was meant to be. And though he still carried the memory of that day in the park, it no longer burned, it guided him. A scar turned compass, pointing him toward the kind of strength Chuck Norris had spoken of all along. Summer drifted into early autumn, and with it came a quiet warmth that hung low over the city like a sigh of relief. The trees in Westbrook Park had begun to change color, their edges touched with gold and amber. It had been months since that day, the day that had split 3 lives into a before and an after. For most of the world, the video had faded from memory, buried under newer scandals, fresher gossip. But for the people who had lived it, it was still there, woven into who they had become. For Chuck Norris, it had been a lesson in patience and faith, that even the worst mistakes could sometimes be turned into purpose. For Amy, it was proof that silence and dignity could be stronger than fear. And for Kyle Brooks, it had become the starting point of his entire life. That morning, the park looked almost the same as it had that first day sunlight through the oaks, children laughing near the fountain, people feeding ducks by the lake. Yet everything about the place felt different. It was no longer a scene of humiliation, but of quiet redemption. A local charity had organized a small community event, a gathering of martial arts schools from around the area to raise money for veterans programs and youth centers. Banners hung between the trees, tables offered food and drinks, and on one side of the park, a demonstration mat had been set up. Chuck and Amy walked slowly down the familiar path, the one that curved past the bench where everything had begun. Amy hesitated when she saw it, her steps faltering for just a moment. Chuck noticed, following her gaze. The same bench stood there beneath the same oak tree. Only now it seemed smaller, harmless. "It feels strange being back," Amy said softly. Chuck nodded. "Sometimes it's good to return to where pain was born. It reminds you of how far you've come." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you're quoting yourself." He chuckled. "Maybe I am." As they reached the crowd near the demonstration area, applause rippled through the park. On the mat stood a group of students in white and black uniforms performing synchronized forms. Amy's attention was drawn to one figure at the center. The movements were fluid, measured, filled with focus. When the student bowed to finish the sequence and turned to face the audience, Amy froze. "Dad," she whispered, "look." Chuck followed her gaze. The young man in the black GI had grown leaner, his posture straight, his face calm in a way that once would have been impossible. It was Kyle. He bowed deeply to his partner, then helped him up with both hands before stepping aside. There was no arrogance, no showmanship, only precision and control. The crowd clapped again, and he smiled modestly before turning toward the next group. That was when his eyes met Amy's. For a split second, the noise around them disappeared. He froze, uncertain, then offered the smallest of nods. When the demonstration ended, Kyle stepped off the mat and wiped sweat from his forehead. As he turned, he saw Chuck and Amy standing near the edge of the crowd. He hesitated, then began walking toward them. His steps were measured, his breath steady, but his heart raced like it hadn't in months. "Mr. Norris," he said when he reached them, bowing instinctively. "Miss Norris." Amy gave a polite nod. "You remember me." "I could never forget," he said quietly. I'm glad you're both here." Chuck studied him for a long moment. The boy, or rather the young man before him, was not the same one who had once stood trembling in a park surrounded by shame. His voice had weight now, his movements control. Even his eyes were different, steady instead of restless. "You've been training," Chuck said. "Every day," Kyle replied. "Hiroshi, the instructor here, took me in after you brought me that night. I haven't missed a session since." Chuck tilted his head slightly. "Why?" Kyle met his gaze, not defiantly, but with quiet honesty. "Because you were right. I wasn't fighting anyone that day but myself. I wanted to learn how to stop losing." Amy looked at him carefully. "And did you?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I think I'm still learning. But I don't hate who I see in the mirror anymore. That's a start. Chuck's voice was calm. You've learned humility. I've learned what it feels like to have none, Kyle said, his tone raw but steady. And I don't ever want to go back to that. For a brief moment, none of them spoke. The sounds of the event carried softly around them, the clatter of folding chairs, the laughter of children, the rhythmic thud of hands striking practice pads. Then near one of the food stalls, a loud argument broke out. Two teenagers, about the same age Kyle had been during the incident, were shouting at each other, shoving, the beginnings of a fight unfolding while parents watched helplessly. Chuck's eyes flicked toward the scene, then back to Kyle. Go, he said simply. Kyle blinked. What? Show me what you've learned. Without hesitation, Kyle jogged toward the commotion. When he reached the boys, one of them was gripping the other by the shirt, his voice rising in anger. Say that again, I dare you. Hey, Kyle said, stepping between them, his tone calm, steady. That's enough. The taller boy sneered. Who the hell are you? Someone who's been exactly where you're standing, Kyle said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a quiet authority that made the boy hesitate. You think this will make you feel stronger? It won't. It'll make you small, smaller than you already feel. Get lost, man, the boy muttered, trying to push him aside. Kyle caught his wrist gently, firmly, the way Chuck had once caught his. He didn't twist or shove, just held it in place until the boy stopped struggling. You don't want to do this, he said softly. Trust me. For a tense moment, the boy's chest heaved, ready to strike. Then slowly his shoulders dropped. The fight drained out of him like air from a balloon. He pulled his arm back and looked away. Whatever, he muttered before turning and walking off. The smaller teen exhaled shakily, mumbling a quick, thanks. Kyle nodded. Just remember, real strength doesn't need an audience. Then he turned and walked back toward the crowd. Chuck and Amy had watched the whole thing without moving. When Kyle stopped in front of them, the older man gave a small nod. Good. Kyle frowned slightly. Good? Chuck's expression softened just enough to reveal the faintest hint of approval. You didn't fight him. You stopped him. That's better than any victory. Kyle's shoulders relaxed, and a faint smile broke across his face. I guess the lesson stuck. Chuck's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Maybe it did. Amy stepped closer, her expression warm, sincere. For what it's worth, I forgive you. Kyle froze. The words hit harder than any strike he had ever taken. You really? She nodded. You earned it, not with apologies, but with change. He bowed slightly, emotion thick in his throat. Thank you. You have no idea how much that means. Chuck watched the exchange in silence, his gaze thoughtful. You've come far, he said at last. I had a good teacher, Kyle replied. Chuck shook his head. You taught yourself. I only opened the door. They stood there for a moment, three people bound by a past that had once been cruel but was now something else, proof that even the worst mistakes could lead to something good. As the sun dipped lower, painting the park in shades of amber and rose, Amy glanced at her father. You think he's really changed? She asked quietly as Kyle turned to help an elderly man carry boxes to a nearby booth. Chuck watched him for a moment, his eyes narrowing in thought. He didn't flinch when challenged. He didn't lose control. He chose peace. That's change, Amy smiled. You taught him well. Chuck shook his head. He taught himself. I just reminded him what strength really is. They walked slowly back toward their car, the sounds of the park fading behind them. Before getting in, Chuck paused and looked over his shoulder one last time. In the distance, Kyle was laughing easily as he helped set up chairs, his movements relaxed and natural. For the first time since that afternoon months ago, Chuck felt the last traces of tension lift from his chest. The boy who had once been consumed by pride had learned the hardest truth of all, that redemption was not in being forgiven, but in becoming worthy of forgiveness. As they drove away, the light of the setting sun spilled across the windshield. Amy leaned back in her seat, watching the trees blur by. It's strange, she said softly, that something so terrible could lead to something so good. Chuck smiled faintly. Sometime, he said, it only takes one mistake to meet the person you were meant to become. And as the car turned the corner, the wind moved gently through the trees, whispering across the park that had once held pain, but now carried peace. 3 lives had crossed there, each leaving behind a version of themselves they no longer needed. And though the world would forget the video, the shame, the noise, the lesson would remain, quiet and indestructible, like the calm in Chuck Norris's eyes when he first walked across that park. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now to see more real-life stories of strength, justice, and redemption. Watch the next video. It will change how you see power forever. Share this story with your friends and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.